In this video we are going to take a closer look at some of the main takeaways for Deathwatch when it comes to our Army of Renown, the recent addition of the Armor of Contempt rule, as well as the upcoming chapter approved release. These topics are based on the recent crossover episode with Rick from NoobHammer that we did live on his channel, which included a mix of pre-selected topics as well as questions from the viewers. At the end of the video, there will be a summary of what has been covered.
Welcome to SwissHammer, your channel for modeling in Warhammer 40k. My name is Tammer and I will be guiding you through this video.
First of all, a big shout out to Rick from NoobHammer for inviting me on his channel, and of course to the viewers who managed to catch us live and ask a lot of great questions. For me personally, it was my first live stream and I sure missed having my script once in a while. But I have to say it is a very appealing format and I really enjoyed the more direct interaction with the audience. If you haven't seen the full crossover episode yet, I left the link down in the description. The first topic is going to be the upcoming chapter approved 2022 called Warzone Nephilim, which GW revealed at the Warhammer Fest, and next to the very welcome announcement that points will move to being available online, they also stated that armies will start each game with around half as many CPs as before. However, we will also gain extra CP each battle round. On this topic, we had the following two takes.
You know, if you were an army starting with like the full CP, you can say, okay, yeah, it's actually nice that I have it a bit later, but for Space Marines, I don't think it's going to be so nice, because the moment we have to decide, do we take the relics and whatever else, or do we spend the CP in the first two rounds? That's going to hurt, I think.
It's one of the reasons the AoR can exist, is those alpha strikes, because you like make your whole army like let's say Iron Hands, and then you make your Indomitor team Imperial Fists, you move them up, you use a chaplain litany on them, you got your captain nearby for rerolls, like you're doing so much to support them. And then you burn 3 CP on specialism, so you've already spent 5 CP on one team on like turn 1 or 2 to try to get your money's worth out of this super expensive kill team, because otherwise, like, you'll be way behind. So it might really adversely affect us, because armies that don't need to dump CP to be efficient, like NIDS, will benefit from that more.
So basically, as someone who tends to pre-invest heavily into both warlord traits and relics, which I believe are a very valuable asset, and the Army of Renown is no different there, my main concern here is that this change will hurt armies with great warlord traits and relics, which I would argue Deathwatch certainly is. On the other hand, Rick, who starts with more CP in his lists, rightly points out that it will limit the high CP combos, such as Specialism Extremists and Brotherhood of Veterans, in the initial battle rounds, where they tend to be most potent, because they can still affect the big 10-man blob, which might no longer be the case in later rounds once you have taken casualties. Furthermore, he also mentions how the Army of Renown leans towards early game Alpha Strike kind of gameplay. Another interesting topic is the usage of the paragon of their chapter Ultramarines Warlord trait, which allows CP regen on a 5+. One of the limitations of 9th edition, however, is that you cannot gain or refund more than 1 CP per battle round. Rick and me were discussing whether this makes the warlord trait more valuable or not, and I think this will boil down to being able to actually get a reasonable chance to regain during the first 2 battle rounds, which might not be possible if you are starting with a very low CP. Overall, it will be interesting to see how the Army of Renown lists change in particular, because I think it will now be a choice between either keeping the Alpha Strike potential or making use of our great warlord traits, relics and the Teleportarium. Moving on to the second topic, the impact of the Armor of Contempt rule. Here we pointed out a few clear advantages for Deathwatch, one of which is the ability to drop the Dominus Aegis. This opens up more options for both Dreadnought lists, as well as lists wanting to bring along a Watchmaster for the full rerolls, rather than a fighty, or not so fighty, captain. Rick pointed this out as following.
My captain did 0 melee damage during my last RTT, but what I kept wanting consistently every turn is like, I wish my Indomitor team or this team had reroll all hits. That would be incredible. And that's what the Watchmaster gives. And if you advance him, he's going to be moving 9 on average. So that's
Should
not
be
too
okay
bad.
to keep
Yeah.
up. No, it's not. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's really nice with the AoC change. We can now have him instead of something else, which we couldn't really do before.
What I really like about this change is that it solves the whole Watchmaster versus Captain dilemma I really felt that we were struggling with. Because we cannot upgrade our Captain to Chapter Master, getting the full rerolls plus the Dominus Aegis was only ever possible with both a Watchmaster and a second character like the Company Champion, which is a huge extra investment. That problem is now solved thanks to the Armor of Contempt rule. There is, however, one big downside as far as I'm concerned, which is playing into other Space Marines, Salamanders in particular.
To get back to the Salamanders you mentioned before, I'm excited that we can use it, but also, on the other hand, playing into Salamanders as the Army of Renown. Ooh, we are throwing specialisms out of the window. And I have been keeping track of the event.
Yeah.
Salamanders players are rising. They are on the rise.
Now, I understand that we are sort of early into these changes, but here is what I have gathered so far based on the latest events of these past few weeks. While the big Space Marine comeback has not yet happened, there are a lot of potential Space Marine players, and I think we are seeing some of them looking for a new meta Space Marine chapter emerging from this. While Deathwatch is currently being rated as A tier, I think the overall complexity of playing the Army of Renown is preventing the big jump by meta chasers onto the faction. On the other hand, both Dark Angels and Salamanders are more straightforward to play. While Dark Angels may seem like the obvious pick, Salamanders are benefiting from both the Armor of Contempt as well as a new powerful chapter tactics, switching off wound rerolls, and as I was already mentioning in my latest tournament coverage video, the number of Salamanders players has been rising, as could for instance be seen at the Dallas Open. Furthermore, at the very recent US Open Seattle Warhammer 40k GT, Deathwatch ended up as the best placed Space Marine faction on rank 16, but Salamanders then placed as second best Space Marines on rank 26. Should they manage to sneak back into the meta, they can potentially turn out to be a nasty gatekeeper army for our Kill Team Strike Force, essentially rendering the points of 4 to 5 mandatory specialisms close to useless, past the usage of specialism extremis, and generally making our army less effective. Overall, while the current meta may offer far greater challenges such as Tyranids, I think that Deathwatch so far has always played nicely into Space Marine matchups, which may now turn out to be far more challenging. Moving on to the third topic, Deathwatch getting FAQs or not. Rick was making a great point here about flying under the radar.
Just a real quick point. Something like any change to any chapter also buffs Deathwatch, or changes Deathwatch. So like this change to Salamanders where you just don't get to reroll wounds against them. In the AoR, you pick Salamanders, you can do it twice in one game. You can have 2 turns where the enemy doesn't get to reroll wounds against you at all.
On the other hand, we also identify 2 cases where the ruling is not as clear as it should be. The first and perhaps more known is Specialism Extremis and Auto-Hitting Flamers, which has been ruled differently depending on country, rule set and/or TOs. To give a quick overview, some argue that a rare rules FAQ addressed this, while others refer to a glossary entry, but ultimately it would be nice to get an official stance. That one aside, a perhaps less known issue is the interaction between the Xenos Hunter chapter tactics and full rerolls from specialisms.
The one arguing that you still get the benefits because the description of the chapter tactics doesn't say that it actually has to be active. I was hearing something like that on one of the interviews. I was just thinking, man, that's cheesy.
Kakalmaka, I probably just butchered the shit out of that.
I would butcher that name as well.
Is saying you still get the full reroll.
What this ultimately means is that strictly rules as written, the Xenos Hunter chapter tactics does not have to be active in order for the full rerolls to be available. The reason I said this is cheesy during the live stream is because this ruling would of course make the Xenos Bane Warlord trait close to useless, which for me is the reason why I believe that this is an unintended oversight. For those remembering my original Kill Team Strikeforce review, I mentioned that I would consider this one very important, but of course for as long as we have this rules loophole, the situation is very different. Anyway, one of my viewers from the UK mentioned to me a while ago that he was challenged about this rule at an event, and I imagine that similar things can happen regarding flamers, or even generally accepted rules, such as using the beacon and chalice turn 1. While Rick cracked that joke about bringing several pounds of rulebooks as Deathwatch, I would add to that as a recommendation to bring along additional extracts, notes or ideally an official stance from the TO about these special cases mentioned before. For those who watched the live stream, both Rick and me interpreted the rules about the full rerolls differently, and it required one of the viewers to chime in. That's not the kind of situation you want to be in when playing at a competitive event or playing anywhere as far as I'm concerned. Then last but not least, I think also worth mentioning are our anti-Xenos stratagems, which with the exception of the Necrons one were written with the old Xenos codexes in mind, and some of them changed for the better or worse.
So they're gonna put like 5 marker lights on them, fire at it with 1 unit, and then you just remove all the marker lights. It's actually not terrible. Not for one CP. So big fan of that one. It lets the Tau players still use their marker alliance, but they have to be smarter about how they use them. Like they're not just a passive buff for the whole phase. It's like they have to shoot at it with what they really think can do damage because they know the marker lights are going to go away.
The big takeaway here for me was the Tau one, which I thought was worse than it actually is. All in all, I think that Deathwatch benefited a lot from getting the Army of Renown, as well as having gained more flexibility thanks to the Armor of Contempt rule. One concern of me, however, is that the more we are streamlining to this one way to play Deathwatch, the more we are at risk of missing out the moment Space Marines as a faction are getting new units, or generally changes that will happen outside of what we can do with our kill teams. Personally, I am still hoping for a slight points decrease in our regular troops, or GW actually updating some of the kill teams with new datasheets and or keyword changes, but we have to see how that will go in the future. On the other hand, I think Dreadnought lists are still doing alright, and should GW perhaps revert some of the points nerfs, like for example the increase to Redemptors, that will once more work in our favor. On the flip side of things, I think the upcoming change to CP will potentially hurt our Army of Renown, as will Salamanders, or even Valorous Heart Sisters, though at least as far as Sisters is concerned, the meta seems to be dead set on Bloody Rose for now. To wrap things up, over the course of the video, we have looked at I would consider the main takeaways for Deathwatch when it comes to our Army of Renown, the recent addition of the Armor of Contempt rule, as well as the upcoming chapter approved release, based on the recent crossover episode done with Rick from NoobHammer. With Warzone Aphelium about to halve the starting CP for all armies, but increasing the gain per round, scrubs like me might have to look into pre-investing less before the game and finding something to do during round 4 and 5. Speaking of which, a Spectre's kill team with Eliminators might be ideal for some late game shenanigans with their Phobos stratagems. There, I had to say it, can't have me missing out on hyping my favorite kill team. Furthermore, we agreed that the Armor of Contempt has brought some amazing changes to Deathwatch, perhaps my favorite being the Watchmaster no longer having to compete with the Dominus Aegis relic on the Captain. Something to look out for as potential gatekeeper for Deathwatch might be salamanders though, which are currently on the rise. I will keep you guys posted on that in my monthly tournament videos. Another big topic was the ruling of full specialism rerolls while Xenos Hunter isn't active, which strictly according to rules as written is in fact not required, but be prepared to defend that one when challenged. At this point, clearing it with the TO might be the best way to approach it. Then last but not least, don't be like me and forget about the anti-Xeno stratagems. They are situational, but have their usage. Tau marker lights in particular are worth mentioning, which now work in the way that you have to let one Tau unit shoot at yours with the marker lights on, but you can then remove all remaining stacks, which is actually pretty good, as Rick rightly pointed out. So that's it for what I would consider the main takeaways for Deathwatch, based on my chat with Rick over at NoobHammer. If you guys haven't watched the full episode yet, I recommend that you do so, link is in the description. And for those who already did, let me know in the comments whether you guys liked it or not, and or if you have any further questions about the topics covered. Finally, I would also like to mention that there is a SwissHammer Facebook page where I will be posting links to my videos as well as articles I find of interest. I do read a lot about the hobby, but not all of it will always end up as its own video. I look forward to seeing you there as well. I do also have a Patreon page. If you like my content, any additional support is greatly appreciated as it helps me invest into future videos. As always, thank you very much for watching guys, your continued support is greatly appreciated. I hope you have been enjoying this video, give me a thumbs up if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thanks again and see you next time.